Hello, my great friends. Welcome back. It's going to be part two, exploring what matters the least in our lives and why do we need to know that to become the best versions of ourselves. And I'm going to start today's video with a confession. I was embarrassed by this one for many years. In 1990, I graduated high school and I began my college journey. And I did not go the four-year route. It took me 10 years to finish college. And it wasn't because I got a PhD or anything like that. It was just a pure bachelor's degree. I will say I went to a college called the UCF, which was supposedly stood for You Can't Finish. So I did. But I remember the day I got my diploma and I stepped off the stage and was embraced by my family. And I'm going back to the car and I'm thinking to myself, this is the last time I ever pick up a book. I'm done learning. I'm sick of learning. This is the last book I'll ever pick up. Famous last words, I'll tell you. I went off into the world. I started my own business, Pure Energy Wellness. It was a pretty good success until the economy crashed. I almost lost everything in 2008. And if you've watched the first video, you know a birthday card from my daughter calling me the world's greatest dad was what changed my life. Now, how this fits into the story was I didn't know how to be the greatest dad in the world. And I did something I encourage all of you to do. If you don't know how to be great at something and you want to be great at it, get a coach. So I had gotten a coach named John, awesome guy, had my first session with him, and I thought, man, I'm one step closer to being the greatest dad in the world. But as I left his office that day, he stuck something in my hand. You guessed it, a book. And it was called The Shift by Dr. Wayne Dyer. And he said, this coaching will only work if you're willing to put the work in between. And some of your work is, John, you got to read this book, The Shift. And I'll tell you what, it was transformational, but I was ready to learn now. And in this Wayne Dyer book, it taught me a lot of things, but the one thing that really stands out to me to this day, it's better to be happy than to be right. It's better to be happy than to be right. And this took me into a whole new evolution in my life. I became the greatest dad. I learned to love people. I learned to be happy. And then in 2012-13, lost my wife to the heroin, lost my best friend Jay Folk to liver cancer. And once again, I was at a crossroads in my life. And I was at a crossroads where I was laying down on the floor of my gym and I was crying. Didn't think I was ever going to get up. Of course, you know, video number 4, the ultimate lesson, a little dog loved me, got me up off that ground. But what happened after that is even better. One of my best, closest friends, Charlie Clayton, came walking in my gym that day, and he could tell I had been crying. And he knew it had been a really tough 6 months. And he perked me up that day, but a couple hours later, he came up to my office, and guess what he handed me? A book. He handed me a book, and it was Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. And I could tell when he handed it to me, he says, John, you need to read this book. And I was thinking back to John, it was kind of the same feeling, and I read this book, and it taught me so many things, like don't judge others, but it taught me something that I had never comprehended, and that is in our lives, we're gonna have suffering. You, me, my daughter behind the camera, we're all gonna have some suffering in our lives. And with a lot of people, it makes them really, really bitter. And they become victims. And you never move forward in your life if you're a victim. But in Mr. Frankl's book, he said you have to take all of the suffering of your life and create meaning from it. And that's what I did. I started this coaching business. I started this speaking business. And I started sharing my stories with other people for me to heal and to also help them heal. And I was always still reading Wayne Dyer in between all of this. In fact, I was going to go see Wayne Dyer about 2 years after all of this had went down with the wife and my best friend Jay, and Dr. Dyer died a week before I was going to see him in Orlando. And this lady who knew how much I loved books at this point, she came walking into my office a week later, and she handed me, you're wrong, she didn't hand me a book, she handed me a CD of a book. And she said, I know you got to be sad over Dr. Dyer dying. I think you'd really like this author. He's from Australia. And I felt, once again, it was like Charlie, it was like John. I'm like, I got to listen to this book, and I'm loving books at this point. And I go down to my car on my break, had a CD player in there. Back in the day, cars still had CD players. And the guy said, has your life ever felt confusing? It's awesome Australian voice. I probably just butchered that. Hopefully he won't watch this. And he said, have you ever asked God what God wants from your life? And I was like, man, I've never done that. I'm ashamed. And he said, I can't tell you exactly what God wants for your life, but I can tell you this. God wants you to be the best version of yourself. I was like, whoa, I got to meet this guy. Some of the most powerful speaking and writing I'd ever heard. Guy's a great author. Pick up any of his books. You won't be disappointed. Well, as fate would have it, I went and I made the dream to meet this guy live. I met him live. And turns out he was fascinated by my story, and he asked me to join his team at Floyd Consulting. And now I get to travel all over the United States of America. I get to work with clients in multiple different countries, many different states. But that's not really important. What's important is that you understand this message. I was very closed down to learning. But now I have this intellectual curiosity that will cease the day I die. Why? Because books change our lives. Books change our lives. You want to know what your future is? Invite me over to your house, or at least a Skype meeting, and show me your bookcase. And show me the books that are really well worn. Because you show me those books, I'll be able to show you exactly what your future looks like. Because books change our lives. And in closing, what matters the least? Things that don't change our lives. Television programs like the Not Real Housewives, or wasting time with the Kardashians, or watching other people play sports when you could be out there yourself enjoying God's creation. Books change our lives. What matters the least? Things that don't. God bless you all. See you next week.
Books change our lives. And speaking of books, we have a book coming out based on this channel titled, Hey You, Get Out of the Porta Potty. And this book contains 10 lessons that will help you lead your best life and not a crappy life. Tune in the next video to see how you can get your own copy of this book. Please hit like, subscribe, and share.